Our next session is titled Ink and Empowerment, Women in Publishing. The moderator of the session is Mina Malik, and our panelists are Mehvash, Amin, and Muneeza, Shamsie. I will quickly introduce Mina Malik. She's an Oxford-trained poet, writer, and editor at the People Press, the publishing house she co-founded in 2022. Mina has had poems published in Riwayat, Vellum, and other literary publications around the world, and was longlisted for the Briefly Poetry Prize in 2022. Shall we start? Yes.
Thank you for having us. मेरी आवाज़ आ रही है सबको on this mic? All right. Thank you. Could we just take a moment to just settle down for our conversation so that this conversation can happen? Okay. So, welcome to this panel. It's called Ink and Empowerment, and I'm in excellent company today. So, what we're basically doing is representing the Pakistan Association of Women Publishers and Editors, which is it's a new organization which is open to, of course, any women editors or publishers in the audience, or if you know of them. And all three of us are here today to talk about the work that we do in our individual capacities as publishers and editors, and also about the work that the organization is doing and plans to do. So I will just quickly introduce my colleagues to you. Muneeza, Shamsie here on my left, basically needs no introduction, but I'll still give you a brief one, is a writer, a critic, an editor, and a literary journalist who, amongst many other wonderful things, has edited 4 anthologies of Pakistani English writing, including my particular favorite, A Dragonfly in the Sun. And Mehvash Amin is the editor-in-chief and publisher of the Alif Review, which is Pakistan's premier literary and arts journal. She is the publisher at Broken Leg Publications and has worked with magazines for over a decade, most notably Libas magazine, which she was the editor-in-chief of for 10 years. So hello, friends, welcome. Okay, so I want to sort of start off with just introducing Poppy, as we call it, like the flower. So what Poppy is, it's a collective of women editors, publishers, writers, artists, and researchers, including our friend Sadia there in the audience, with a view to supporting the independent literary landscape in Pakistan. Poppy aims to find sustainable solutions so magazines and publishing houses can operate whilst maintaining financial and aesthetic autonomy. So we have members all over Pakistan, including Neelufar Farooq, who is the founder of the Karachi Biennale Festival and ran Nukta Art for many, many years. Of course, our friend Rahila here at the OUP, and Mariam Paracha at the Missing Slate, amongst many others. So I think that the organization is new, but the work that its members have been doing has, I would say, and I think not without some bias, is that women's contributions to writing and to publishing and to keeping a very distinct liberal voice going in this country is remarkable and is one that we don't talk about enough. And magazine culture, which is kind of now at its sort of low ebb, and I publish a magazine myself and I feel very strongly about this. Can somebody fix these mics? एक तो लोग बहुत बोल रहे हैं यहाँ,
Yeah,
so that's
please
a problem.
do not speak. It's very rude. Those at the end of the hall, please don't speak.
और अगर मेरे mic का volume ऊंचा हो सकता है, so perhaps that, and I think I'll just pop it in my lap. Is this better? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Acha. So magazine culture, which was very strong and has now kind of ebbed. But Muneeza, if you could talk to us a little bit about how women and magazines really kind of started this. Because again, I also feel like novels have always been seen as a very masculine thing. You know, men who write serious things and then they write these novels. And then magazines are sweet and fluffy and for women and, you know, time pass, which is really not the case, but tell us more.
Can you hear me now? Okay, the magazine culture, I mean, we're basically focusing on the post-independence culture. But actually, the magazine culture, um, you know, in the 19th century, you had magazines like the Tehreek and Niswan and magazines like Ismat, they were Urdu magazines. And they gave a platform to a whole lot of women writers. You know, Atia Faizi, Sohra Akram, Begum Karamullah, all these people, they wrote for these magazines. And it gave them a voice, and it developed, this is not my field, I'm coming back onto the English. In English, the development of women's magazines, again, did the same thing. It meant that women were able to have a voice. Women who didn't have full-time jobs or whatever they were, there were very few jobs available for women in the 50s and 60s. One of them that was accepted was magazines. Later on, of course, it starts developing further. There were women's magazines. But I mean, for example, Newsline was rare. It had started off as Herald. It was not a women's magazine. It was a general women's magazine, a monthly magazine, and it was run by women. That showed an entire change in journalism, in women's writings. One of the things that this organization, POPE as we call it, this is shortened, is doing, it's very interested in archiving women's magazines, magazines published by women. It's archiving Newsline. At the moment, it started at the moment, and it's archiving She magazine. Both of them are very important. Newsline, because it was a mainstream magazine, a monthly, which was run largely by women with a wonderful woman editor, and Rehana Hakim, Samina Ibrahim, Razia Bhatti, we all know them all. She magazine was Zora Segal, and she had introduced, it gradually became more and more feminist. It came in the 60s. Before Zora, there was Women's World, run by Mujiba Nisa Akram, that also provided a platform for women, and so actually did Mirror. Now, the Mirror magazine, people tend to think, oh, well, it was just social. That was run by Zaibun Nisa Hamidullah. But it's very interesting. The reason why Mirror magazine began is quite different. She used to write for Dawn, and she wrote a political article one day. And her editor hauled her up and said, you are a woman, you can only write about women's issues. What have you written this article for? She left and she started her own magazine. And although, of course, to make it a project that had to run, she it was known for its social pages, but it had very serious political editorials. And in the 1960s, she actually got into serious trouble for writing against Ayub. And I think she was the first woman editor, publisher, and then she won her case. So there was much happening in women's magazines that was really important. It was both giving a space to women, giving them a voice, and moving beyond and putting them in the mainstream.
I think that's wonderful. And I think that is so emblematic also of how when women aren't given mainstream space well, just mainstream space, really. It's how we find ways and how women have found ways to platform other women and to platform everybody's voices, to platform so many marginalized voices, and just sort of put out a narrative which is counter to what everybody's consuming all the time. So it's really kind of like a counterculture being run by women, and I quite like the idea of doing that. So, Mehvash, you've run magazines for years, and you were at Libas, and again, Libas was also, I think, still is in a different way, a publication that wasn't just fashion. It was a really smart magazine, which was saying a lot of different things. So, what was that experience like?
That was actually quite a wonderful experience because, again, Libas is thought of as a fashion magazine. And of course, fashion was a very important part of it. But as sort of hidden within all that fashion and lifestyle, and I mean, I would regularly source out writers, I would source out artists, exhibitions, It was a normal part of our. So you're right. I mean, magazines can somehow, sometimes maybe it's difficult to have a magazine, because I've been publishing now Aleph for 7-8 years, and it is difficult to perhaps just talk about art and literature, which are my main interests. So with Libas, it was very interesting that you could sandwich between all the pages of fashion and of glamour and everything. You could find you could insert all these other topics.
Absolutely.
And I remember when I went to London and I met this British curator. He was at the V&A, and he was very interested. He said, he was a curator at the V&A, and he said, I love the format of Libas because it's so beautifully and sumptuously done. And he, I remember, wrote for me. Then there were other art critics, etc. There was an Indian art critic, Geeta Alvarez Meneses. There was so many others who were very happy to be part of Libas, because yeah, there was that frothing, and there was the little cream on top of
Yes.
the thing, and nothing wrong with that.
Ah,
I mean,
absolutely.
lifestyle is also, and fashion is also, important.
And you
But
have
in
like Vogue, for example, does the same thing, where they're very kind of politically minded, but then they've also got lifestyle, and you can have all of the things.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And so that, and then after that, I was also editor of Hello Magazine for
Yes.
a while. Again, I mean, you would be surprised that though that is, that was a franchise, and that's why I was interested in being editor of it, because it was a wholly different experience.
Yeah.
To produce something once a month and coming down from Lahore to produce it. But again, I mean, because I feel that, it's not just our entertainment industry that needs to be highlighted. It is our artists, our writers, our women, whatever they're doing. And that used to be
Yeah.
a leitmotif with
And
us.
I think it's very important to remember that a lot of women editors who are running publications are poets and writers and artists, and in their own right.
Yeah.
And both of you are writers.
Yeah.
And maybe you're a poet as well. So am I. So tell me a little bit about what was the sort of transition for you from working for a publication to then creating your own, which is, of course, the tremendous Aleph Review. And we're very happy for you guys to be the first people to see our very latest edition.
This is, I just got it coming over
Hot
from Lahore.
off the press.
From the press, hot off the press. This is our latest Aleph. We've published, this is our seventh.
This is the seventh
And we
one.
are in the process of publishing our
Yes.
eighth.
So
Mina
your
is
move-
also an editor.
Yes, I am. So this movement, and because, again, as a poet, as a writer, as an editor, and now also as somebody who runs a publishing house, like, what are we thinking?
It's very difficult.
Yes.
I think in Pakistan to run a publishing thing is extremely difficult as a woman. Or I don't know about men's experience in that field. But for a woman, I know I have to take care of, once the book is printed, I have to send it to various distributors, to booksellers. And, barring a few, it's very, very difficult work to get. It's easy giving them the magazine, but for them to get back and give you money, it's like getting water out of rock, literally.
Right. And
One of
Muneeza,
the
you were on
things.
the panel previously talking about English Anglophone writing in Pakistan, and there was a really interesting point that I thought we could talk about here, is that people keep saying that, oh, there's no reading culture. But in Pakistan, but at the same time, people are still buying books. And bookstores are selling out of things. Like, I know when I go to my favorite bookstores and I want X or Y, they don't have it because it's been sold. So people are buying things. So what's happening then? Why aren't people buying local publications? Like, either one of you really, like, there clearly is a reading culture, isn't there?
Yes,
And
there
we
is a
have
reading
people here
culture,
with
but I
us.
suppose, I mean, if you take the wider perspective, we don't have a very high literary culture, So, I mean, if you're taking percentage, but yes, book sells and people do buy books. And as I was mentioning in an earlier session, we also, it's not just a reading culture, we have a very strong oral culture where it's not, poetries are not, we're very, very keen on storytelling, we're very keen on, people who can't read. I mean, we talk about literacy, but people who can't read actually know poems. They'll be able to recite poems. So we've got a very strong, I just wanted to go back on the archiving thing, which I think is terribly important, because we tend to forget what has happened in the past, and it provides so many keys into what we are and what we have. And I think they're also they'll be training archivists. I don't think we've got an archiving culture, and I think we need an archiving culture as much as we need a reading culture,
Yes, and that also contributes to then research. And we were talking about this earlier, about how you've edited and put together these wonderful anthologies. And some of the work in those anthologies, for many, I'm sure, sort of administrative reasons, and are texts that aren't accessible or in print any longer. So even an anthology becomes an archive of work in itself.
Well, there's Tariq Rahman, who did the first book on Pakistani English literature. It came out in 1990, and mine. So there was that, and he had discussed a lot of writers, and my book came out sometime after that. But this business of it was very difficult. A lot of my research was done in the British Library. Because in those days they weren't, and today you can go to Project Gutenberg and download all sorts of things. You can download from the Project Internet Archive. I found in our libraries, when we say we don't have libraries, but we do have, and the Liaquat National Library had an amazing amount of books that I had never heard of before. And I found these. So that's how I certainly found Shahid Surawardi's work there, I think. And it was a question of trade. So I had to, because it was a retrospective, my first anthology. And so I had, the other thing that I didn't know about, and this again is what has changed since the internet came out, is that I didn't know the Pakistani English writers in America. I didn't know there really were any. And thanks to Professor Mehman, I was introduced to people like Tahra Naqvi, Moazzam Sheikh, Afzal Haider. There were all these people, and at that time, there were not many published books published. They were all publishing in magazines. At that time, it was still not easy to get published abroad if you were a Pakistani, because it wasn't so well known and so on. But there were a lot of writers who were publishing in main magazines, who were teaching, and so that's how this book developed, and it became this retrospective. And I got, at that time, it was considered a lot. I had 44 writers of Pakistani origin.
That is tremendous. And I really love that people were publishing in magazines, and magazines become a more accessible way to enter literature. And Mehvash, do you feel that Aleph, for example, has been a good sort of bridge for people to get a taste of Pakistani writing and to get a taste of art, and in a non-threatening way? Do you think that sometimes books feel daunting and magazines are friendlier?
I don't know. Well, I mean, considering this is not really, it's a journal, and there's that difference between a magazine and a journal, because this is dedicated to art and literature. So anybody who picks it up will have to be interested in those two things. But what I do feel is that we open our the thing to all kinds of writers. And as you know, we welcome writing from young people, from people all over the world. And we've published, writing from all over the world, but also all genres of writing. So we don't make any distinction as long as the work is creative and excellent. Whether it's science fiction or we don't have and we have a website as well, as you know, and we come out with new things 4 times a month. So I don't think I don't think anybody who's not interested in literature or art would pick up Aleph, but I do feel that a lot of people are becoming familiar with it who are more in the art field and the literary field, and they do know about it. So it's not the same thing as Libas was, or in, these magazines, which we did sort of have the material, but you know, hidden among other things, not hidden, with other things. So this is different from that point of view. It's a journal, and but I think there is a growing awareness of it. For example, in the art world, which I find a lot of artists already knowing about it and things, and the young literary people. We also publish established writers. We've published an interview of Kamla Shamsie, and another piece of work by her. So and this time we have Rashid Rana on the cover with a very, very in-depth interview of his. So we are getting known in that world, which is maybe not so huge, but still.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that it's also so impressive to see how steadily Pakistani the writing scene is growing. Like I remember when cartography came out and when Kamala had just begun writing, it was such a revelation because we were like, wow, somebody can write like this, and it's familiar, and it's about people like us, and it's nice to read, and it's not talking down to anybody, and it's smart, and it's just really lovely to see how that's grown. But then you can't have writing in a vacuum either, because if writers are writing and not being published, and it's difficult for them to break out into international publishing. So, Muneeza, where do you feel like there are gaps between the writers and the publishing that can be addressed or need to be addressed? Like, what do you think is the problem here?
I don't think it's a problem as such. I think for a writer, it's a tough profession. For most writers, you write and you don't always find. I mean, we know. I can't offhand come off with them. We know of some terribly well-known writers who, poor things. And this is not Pakistan, this is abroad. They couldn't find, nobody said, oh, well, this is not a boring book. There is this kind of thing about writing and publishing and reaching out to a public and a publisher accepting you. This is a universal problem, but I think if you're a writer, you just go on writing. I think today what has happened, one of the things is that you talk about foreign markets and whatnot, but a foreign publisher does look at a book differently. They won't necessarily tune in to a book. And that's why the publishing of a lot of books by Indian publishers was terribly important, because they understood the nuances. And those books used to come here. Now that has stopped. But what has happened here is now you've got a lot of publishers who've come up in Pakistan, and they are publishing local writers. The problem at the moment is and this is where I think the editorial part comes in, you have to have good editors, and you need to have that kind of support. Otherwise, the writer needs that support, and not an editor who puts in their opinion and dictates to you and drives you bonkers. That also happens. But I mean, that happens over here a lot. I don't know about it. Haven't dealt with foreign publishers. But from what I know, a foreign publisher will be able to say to a writer, well, just think about this, and that is very important. But I think Pakistani English literature, South Asian English literature has really taken off. And it is part of a wider literature in the world today.
Yeah, I think it's exciting to see the directions that we can potentially take and be taking. And I think this is the juncture where I would sort of want to open it up to all of us, because writing and publishing and editing, and these are all, it's a symbiotic kind of process to be in. And there are publishers doing wonderful work, local publishers. At the press, we get a lot of manuscripts, and people send in so much work to Aleph as well. And that's where the work of the editor is crucial, but that's also, and Poppy is a very good resource for this. So if you are an aspiring writer, or you are somebody who knows somebody who has a manuscript, then our website is a good resource, a good place to start, because there are editors here, and there are editors available to improve your work. But we also can't have a publishing industry without people buying what we're producing. So Aleph, for example, it's a wonderful publication.
So I'll tell you what I have done to
and our buying cultures need to improve.
To counteract the fact that maybe not enough people go and pick up the magazine, or they're not aware of it, or the booksellers don't put it up prominently, and they're more interested in selling foreign titles. That's an experience with me.
It's
you
true.
know, they just put them up, and they just these are somewhere hidden in the background. So what I've done is I've started a library outreach program, and I send a set of books to as many libraries that I can find which have English, MPhil or whatever programs, so the books are actually underwritten by sponsors. So for a very small amount, I send all 7 books, for example, to a library, and with the name of the sponsor.
The donor, yes.
And that way, so many more students have an access to the literature within these things. It's gone to many libraries, and it's going to keep on going to others. And I just feel that because libraries have that, it's again a thing of archiving as well. When you put something in a library, it is archived.
Yes,
hopefully.
you have access.
Yeah, so it's available, and people can pick it up, and students can refer to it, and so that's another way that one can project the writings of these people.
Well, thank you. I think we're getting on for time. So in this very brief little slot that we've had, thank you so much for joining me, both of you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being with us. And again, I just want to kind of end on, again, to reiterate this thing, but support your writing culture and support your writing scene by buying your authors. There's so many authors over here at this festival selling their books at Liberty Books, local imprints, they're accessible. Read your writers, support your writers. It's great to read foreign writers, sab kuch theek hai, but read your own people. We're writing for you, and we want you guys to read it and tell us what you think, so that then you write. And then this is how we are going to really rightfully take our place in the South Asian and then even in a global literary scene. And we're getting there, but, hamari kitab mein padhe hai na. So thank you all. And, good afternoon.
Thank you.